As we had seen in our previous section, we're not really limited to just integer coefficients or constants. Pre-calc will have to be really comfortable with all real numbers. So all real numbers, any possible number that you can possibly think of, even though we will be pretty much sticking with more of our rational numbers. So I'm going to show you a few different types or a few different forms that we're going to have to be somewhat familiar with factoring. So our first one is x squared minus 1.5x plus 0.5. Just like before, we want to find out what is our greatest common factor. Now in this one, so what is our greatest common factor? In this one, it may not be completely intuitive. But at the same time, we want to find out what is something that can go into a 1, a 1.5, and a 0.5. This one actually is the 0.5. It's our lowest number. When we factor out a 0.5, 1 divided by 0.5 is 2. 1.5 divided by 0 divided by 0.5 is 3. And 0.5 factored out of 0.5 is 1. Which means we can then do our product and sum. Product of 2, sum of -3, well, that's going to be a -2 and a -1. So I can take my 0.5, 2x squared, subtract 2x, subtract a 1x, add my 1, and continue on with my complex factoring. Again, complex because that number in front of this x squared. We just have to bring down our 0.5. We can factor a 2x out of both of these and be left with a x subtracting 1. And this one, we factor out a -1. Once again, being left with an x subtract 1. Group what we can. So 0.5. And I put in red, so might as well. X minus 1. And we're left with a 2x minus 1. Nothing the same, or nothing else can be factored out. So this question is done. One strategy is absolutely to look for our smallest number. And that's actually the one that we're going to use here. Now, it doesn't mean talk about negatives being technically smaller. We're just talking about smallest number in an absolute sense. And we'll actually be talking about absolutes in one of our future units. But overall, in this one, we're going to have to factor out a negative 0.625. When we factor that out, we'll be left with an x squared. 5 divided by 0.625 is 8. It becomes a negative 8x because we factor out a negative, and 7.5 factoring out the 0.625 is 12. So great thing, this is some factoring. So we're going to be done even faster. Product of 12, sum of -8. Well, that works out nice. -6 and -2. So our negative 0.625 comes out. Negative x in our first location, -6, and -2 in the second. And that's it. How about these two? Well, these ones typically look a little bit harder, but really, they're not. So there's kind of two ways of doing it. I'm just trying to think of what's going to be the best way to work on these. Well, I'll show one way and show one the other. So this one, let's factor it out. We're going to factor out the smallest kind of character here is actually the third. We're going to factor out a 1/3 out of each and every single one of these. So we're asking ourselves 1 divided by 1/3. So that's the same as 1 multiplied by 3/1. 1 times 3 is 3. The next one, we'd have this 17/3 divided by 1/3. So 17/3 multiplied by 3/1. 3's are going to reduce down to be 1 and 1. So subtract 17. Last but not least, 2 divided by the 1/3 means 2 multiplied by 3. Well, there's 6. Do our product and sum. Product of 18, sum of -17. Maybe tricky to figure out those numbers. Oh, they're going to be a 1 and 18. Really? I was wondering why this looked a little bit weird. I didn't take 3 times -6. It needs to be -18. There we go. That works a lot better. So I have -18. So that 1/3. -1/3 is just going to come out. We're going to have the 3x squared and the -6. I'm going to have to add the 1x and subtract the 18x. Split her down the middle. And let's do some special factoring. We can factor out an x. Be left with 3x plus 1. Factor out a -6. Again, be left with 3x plus 1. But we have that 3x plus 1 there. So that 1/3. 3x plus 1. Left with the x subtract 6. And we have this entire thing factored. The last one, we're going to have to do kind of a little bit extra work. I have certainly loved this method, especially since we can see that our smallest numbers are quarters. There's another way we can do it. We just have to be a little bit more fancy with some of our answer stuff. One thing we can do is multiply everything by a common denominator. Multiply this one by a 4, multiply this one by a 4, multiply this one by a 4. But we're not going to forget about this 4. So we're going to have to remember that. When we're solving, we can kind of ignore it, but we'll worry about that when we get into solving. Alrighty. 4 multiplied by a half is 2. 4 multiplied by a -5/4 is a -5. And 4 by a -3 is a -12. Our product and sum would become a -24 and -5. The two numbers to work for that should be a -8 and a +3. So let's do that. Let's do a -8x and a +3x. put her down the middle, and factor what we can. 2x, x minus 4, factor out a 3, and once again be left with an x minus 4. That x minus 4 goes out in the front. Be left with a 2x plus 3. And here's the kind of only sticking point to this factoring. It's the fact that we multiplied this by 4. We'd actually have to then divide our answer by 4. Well, we don't really have to divide it by 4 as much as multiply it by 1/4. So this allows us to still have factored this correctly, because if we just ignored our 1/4, and I'm not going to add any kind of shape, but if we just ignored this, that means that we'd have x times 2x, which is 2x. Well, that's not our question. We do have to include that 1/4 to have factored this correctly. But you can kind of choose your way. I'm flexible. I can work with whatever we need to. So there's a little bit more factoring stuff. Now, the very last thing we're going to do is actually know whether something is a factor or not. And we're going to see if a smaller polynomial is a factor of a larger polynomial. And we do this by what's known as the factor theorem. We're going to be bringing this back in pre-calc 30 because we're going to be learning a little bit even more about factoring. So what the factor theorem states is that x subtract a is a factor of a polynomial in x if and only if PA equals 0, which means wherever this is 0, what we do here is solve for x. So this skill is going to come in real handy, and actually it's going to be the very beginning of our next unit. But we say, where does x equal a? Meaning, by adding a to both sides, all we're going to do is we're going to plug this 0 into another polynomial. So on this one, so for x plus 3, what we do is we say 8 equals 0. So if we solve for the x, we'd be subtracting 3 from both sides. So we would say x equals -3. We're going to plug -3 in for each of these x's to see if it comes out as 0. So we're going to plug -3. Actually, I'm going to stick with green. We're going to plug -3 into here to see if it actually comes out as 0. So plug -3 in. Plus 13 times by -3. So do this work. -3 squared is 9. 2 times 9 is 18. Positive 13 multiplied by -3 is -39. Add 21. That comes out as 0. So that says that x plus 3 is a factor of 2x squared plus 13x plus 21. Basically meaning if I factor 2x cubed plus, or 2x squared plus 13x plus 21, x plus 3 would be one of my factors. And let's actually check that. Squared plus 13x plus 21. Let's do our product and sum. Product of 42, sum of 13. See what kind of numbers out would work like that. 6 and 7. So our 2x squared, add a 6x plus a 7x, add a 21. I'll mentally split her down the middle. I got a 2x and x plus 3. I factor out a 7, x plus 3, group what I can to x plus 3, and actually I'll put this in a different color, 2x plus 7. And that's what those two parts are. So x plus 3 is legitimately one part of 2x squared plus 13x plus 21. This is just kind of a faster way of checking if it is. So we've used the factor theorem and we factored it. Those are two ways of doing it to see if we have a factor or not. It's going to become much more useful in pre-calc 30, but it's still a skill that we need to have. So for 4x minus 3, we're going to follow the exact same kind of thing. And the reason I have this one is because, well, you'll see it in just a second. We add the 3. 4x equals 3. Divide by 4. So x equals 3/4. We have a fraction. Let's plug a fraction in. So p of 3/4 minus, oh, sorry, 7 multiplied by 3/4. It never hurts to have a little bit extra practice with fractions. So let's go over this. 3/4 squared means 3 squared and 4 squared. Multiplying this one means it's 7/1. 7/1 times by 3/4 means 21/4. Now I'm going to make a little bit, I'm going to kind of save a little bit of room. I'm going to multiply this one by a funky form of 1 so that it all works out. I'm going to also reduce this so that we get a 9/4 subtracting a 21/4, adding a 12/4. Does that work out? 9 subtracting 21. Because now that we have common denominators, we can just add and subtract across the top. Yep. This is 0/4, which means 0. Meaning 4x minus 3 is a factor of 4x squared minus 7x plus 3. We could complex factor this, and we'd see that this is one of our factors. Should work out, if I'm doing my math correctly, that the other factor probably x plus 1. Yeah. Or x minus 1. Yeah. Alrighty. 2 more. Well, all we have to do is say, where does x minus 9 equal 0? Well, adding 1 to both sides, sorry, not 1, adding 9 would be 9. So let's plug 9 into here. So we have 9 squared, adding a 9, subtracting 90. 9 squared, 81, add 9, subtract 90. That works out as 0. So x subtract 9 is the factor of x squared plus x subtract 90. That works out great. How about this one? Ooh, b plus d. It's actually not much more difficult. Where does b plus d equal 0? Well, we could actually solve it either way. Let's solve for the b. So let's subtract d. So b equals negative d. So wherever I see b, I can write negative d. So let's see. I'm just going to put a whole bunch of brackets in here. So instead of writing b here, I'm going to write negative d. And that's going to be squared, adding a 3. I'm going to move. Oh, that didn't work. Instead of writing that b, I'm going to write a negative d. This one would still just be a d plus 2d squared. Alrighty, so negative d squared, it would be a positive d squared. This negative squared is positive. I would then have a 3 multiplied by negative d multiplied by positive d. Well, that's going to be a negative 3d squared. And add a 2d squared. 1d squared, subtracting 3d squareds, adding 2d squareds. Yep, that's 0. b plus d is a factor. Of b squared plus 3bd plus 2d squared. Again, this skill is going to come out into a lot more sense when we get into pre-calc 30, but it's still a skill that's going to be very nice to have, especially as we go even into our next unit. Alrighty, you can have some fun.